Every black hole births a universe. No, this isn't science fiction. It's not a distant echo of a Star Wars opening crawl. It's the awe-striking reality that has just shifted the foundations of our known cosmos. Like, subscribe, share, and comment, because what you're about to hear could be the most important story of our species. The story begins not with an explosion, but with a whisper from the abyss. A flicker in the fabric of space detected by the James Webb Space Telescope. The anomaly came from a distant point near a planet designated K218b. At first glance it seemed unremarkable, a dot in the dark, but when the data came in, the radiation patterns, the spectral fingerprints, something emerged that silenced entire rooms of scientists. Webb had not merely looked back in time. It had, somehow, seen through time. A glow appeared, nestled, at the very edge of the observable universe, but its light bore none of the traits of any galaxy, quasar, or cosmic microwave background echo. Instead, the infrared signature pulsed in irregular frequencies, almost like an interstellar heartbeat. To many it was noise, to others it was a signal. But to a few brave minds, it was evidence of something extraordinary. Another universe. Not a metaphor. Not an allegory. Not science fiction. Another universe, born not beside ours but beyond. Routine scans of the deep field sky were the James Webb Telescope's bread and butter. Astronomers expected faint smudges, the fingerprints of long-dead stars, baby galaxies, clawing into existence. What they did not expect was the cosmic anomaly from K218b's field, a low luminescence flicker that somehow defied all known models. The telescope's near-infrared camera, NIRCam, and mid-infrared instrument, MIRI, returned wavelengths incompatible with even the oldest dust-obscured galaxies. The light bent, differently, polarized in strange patterns, moving not across space, but across something else. In hushed conference calls and classified memos, scientists called it the veil. Something lay beyond it. Something hidden. Something not meant to be seen by eyes born of our physics. The public never knew the exact moment humanity crossed the cosmic Rubicon. When James Webb peered through the interstellar curtain, what it saw wasn't a star. It was an echo, not an echo of sound, but of creation, first among scientists, then researchers, then rogue astrophysicists who couldn't resist teasing the impossible on encrypted forums. Speculation erupted. Was it a gravitational leak from a parallel realm? Could it be the residual energy of a universe colliding with ours? Or, most controversially, was this a cosmic birth canal, the point of emergence for a newborn universe from the navel of a black hole? The implications were seismic. If true, this meant that black holes did not merely destroy, they created. That every black hole in our cosmos could be the umbilical cord to another plane of existence. For generations, cosmologists believed our universe began with a singularity, a violent hot birth that expanded space itself. But if this signal proved genuine, the Big Bang was no longer singular. It was one of many, a flickering flame in a sea of candles. Each flame a universe, each candle a black hole. As excitement spread, so did division. The scientific community was suddenly split, not along the usual ideological or theoretical lines, but across an emotional chasm between awe and terror. Quantum physicists spoke of bubble universes and cosmic inflation, positing that what Webb had seen was the bruised rim of our universe where another had once collided. They theorized a cosmic foam of ever-expanding universes, like champagne bubbling in an infinite glass. But others weren't so sure. Dissenters argued that this was a misreading, that rare intergalactic dust clouds or lensing by dark matter concentrations could mimic what appeared to be multiversal interference. They were not wrong, but they were no longer certain. That was the difference. For the first time in scientific memory, doubt wasn't a defect of the data. It was a feature of the universe itself, and that terrified them. Outside laboratories and data centers, the rest of humanity began to feel the tremor. For theologians, it raised ancient questions anew. If we were but one bubble in an infinite foam, where did divinity reside? Was creation a singular act? Or a cascade of divine sparks, each lighting? Another philosopher's too trembled. How do we define identity in a multiverse? If there are infinite versions of you, what makes this one you? Is consciousness tethered to one body, or echoed across all cosmic permutations? Artists painted dreamscapes of parallel Earths, where the oceans burned and the sky was green. Filmmakers envisioned interdimensional travelers and quantum saints. Musicians composed symphonies inspired by the hum of interuniversal vibrations. Poets, always ahead of the rest of us, whispered lines like, "If the soul splits in every choice, does it find itself in every world?" Meanwhile, the public became obsessed. Reddit threads exploded. Conspiracy theories flourished. TikTok channels reenacted fictional lives in alternate dimensions. Memes were created, debated, and remixed into documentaries. But amid the chaos, a profound unity emerged. For the first time in decades, everyone, from janitors to professors, felt part of the same story. And what a story it was. As weeks turned into months, the noise began to clear. Webb continued its vigil, and more signals came. Fainter, weirder, but persistent. The anomalies resisted classification. They didn't align with known cosmic microwave background distortions, nor were they explained by gravitational lensing, supernova remnants, or quasars. They were other, a category of their own. New terminology emerged: transdimensional resonance, gravitational mirroring, quantum spatial bleed. These were no longer fringe concepts whispered in corners of theoretical physics departments. They were the new lingua franca of cosmology. AI neural nets trained to detect interuniversal flickers began to analyze petabytes of archival Hubble and Webb data. Patterns emerged, not regular, not periodic, but real enough to warrant funding, and with funding came ambition. Space agencies proposed the multiverse mapper, a next-gen interferometric array spanning the Earth-Moon L2 point, capable of detecting microlensing shifts in dimensions yet, theorized. Meanwhile, underground labs in Europe built condensed matter analogs of multiverse collisions using ultra-cold atomic clouds. These tabletop universes, while tiny, pulsed in similar patterns to the Webb signals. In the span of 3 years, what began as a whisper from a distant quadrant of sky had catalyzed a scientific revolution. One not just of facts, but of meaning. Paper from Kyoto University postulated that what Webb saw wasn't a static universe, but a bruise from a collision, not metaphorically, literally. During the inflationary period of our early universe, it had collided with another expanding universe. The impact didn't end ours, but it left a scar, a temperature asymmetry, a bruised boundary. And that's what Webb had glimpsed. The implications? Colossal. This wasn't a new universe. It was an old neighbor. And that meant there were others. That the multiverse wasn't out there. It was around us, pressing against us, touching us. Our bubble wasn't alone in the foam. It was part of a network. And suddenly, humanity wasn't just a lonely spark in an infinite void. We were residents of a vast, interconnected cosmic city. Each block a universe, each alley a wormhole, each wall a membrane trembling with unspeakable potential. The collision theory did more than rewrite textbooks. It rewired imaginations. For decades, the multiverse had lived on the fringes of scientific speculation and sci-fi cinema. Now, it surged into the heart of experimental physics, institutional policy, and human culture itself. With Webb's data as the inciting spark, the conversation shifted from "is there a multiverse" to "how many are there and how do we touch them?" And that's when everything changed. The second confirmed signal came from an unexpected place: the South African Meerkat radio telescope. Scientists reviewing radio interference patterns discovered a temporal distortion in the frequency alignment, a brief stutter in radio pulses that aligned precisely with the coordinates of Webb's bruise. When mapped over time, it formed a spiraling vortex, a kind of cosmic ripple echoing outward like a skipped stone across the surface of space. What was unnerving wasn't the signal's strength, it was its consistency. A pattern. One that repeated. That was the moment a chilling question emerged across Slack chats and encrypted conference calls. What if something's trying to communicate? This wasn't SETI. There were no encoded mathematical prime sequences or binary beacons, but there was structure in the anomaly. And structure, as any physicist will tell you, is never random. Yet no language was detected, no clear modulation, just a frequency, then silence, a hum, then stillness, a pulse, then cold. Whatever it was old, ancient beyond reckoning, and it didn't sound like us. At the center of this unfolding cosmic epic stood one haunting implication. Black holes do not merely end space, they create it. According to a revitalized hypothesis known as the Einstein-Rosen cascade, each black hole could serve as a birthing chamber for a new universe. The laws of physics break down at the singularity, yes, but they don't end. They reboot, reassemble, twist into new configurations and ignite the birth of a separate, expanding reality beyond our own. The energy ejected during a star's death throes could become the Big Bang of another world. That would mean our own Big Bang. Could have been the death of another universe. We are someone else's aftermath. The poetic horror of that idea intoxicated cosmologists. Imagine an unbroken lineage of creation, a generational chain of cosmos birthing cosmos. In this view, no universe is the first. There is no alpha, no omega. Only a continuous blossoming of reality through destruction. Each black hole in our sky, hundreds of millions, could be the seed of another entire existence. A mirror Earth, a violent one, a kinder one. A place where the laws of gravity are weaker, where time flows like syrup, or where life evolved without ever needing matter. And if we could observe that, even indirectly, we'd not only expand science, we'd expand what it means to exist. But such beauty, such cosmic sublimity, is never without consequence. As evidence grew, so did fear. Because in a multiverse we are no longer central, our laws are not universal, our story is not unique. And our morality, our history, our culture, all of it, may be just one roll of the cosmic dice, and not everyone was ready for that. In the halls of academia, heated debates turned into ideological civil wars. Philosophers of science found themselves arguing over ontology with experimental physicists. Some called for a re-evaluation of falsifiability, in a reality where other universes could never be observed directly. Others warned this was science in crisis. Too speculative, too mythological. Meanwhile, religious institutions either embraced or denounced the revelation. One Catholic theologian declared the multiverse as the ultimate fingerprint of divine abundance. Others condemned it as an existential threat to doctrine. In the streets, conspiracy theorists twisted multiverse narratives into tools for control, arguing that the elites already had access to alternate timelines. Cults formed, claiming to channel spirits from adjacent realities. A suicide pact in Oregon shook the nation after its leader claimed they would reunite with their true selves in the next universe. This was not just a scientific story. It was spiritual. It was political. It was human. And the more the truth seeped into the mainstream, the more unstable society became, torn between wonder and terror, curiosity and denial. Section X, the architects of the horizon. But amid the chaos, some moved quietly and purposefully. A coalition of elite scientists, engineers and philosophers formed what would later be called the Horizon Assembly, a multinational, interdisciplinary group operating under the public banner of the UN but privately connected to nearly every major space agency on Earth. Their mission, to design humanity's first inter-universal experiment. Dubbed Project Mercury. Its objective was deceptively simple: Send a series of quantum-entangled probes into the event horizon of a known black hole and monitor for correlated changes in the entangled pair remaining on Earth. If the connection held, even through the black hole's singularity, it could prove what was once deemed impossible, that something continues on the other side, and perhaps something returns. But the stakes were unimaginable. The probes required exotic matter and stable quantum entanglement fields far beyond current capacity. Worse still, any unintended signal sent into a forming universe could act as an echo, a viral seed planted into a child cosmos. In essence, we could contaminate creation. And so a new field was born: multiversal ethics. Debates raged within Horizon Assembly on whether humanity had the right to interfere with a new universe, to observe its first moments, to possibly affect its primordial rules. Are we creators or voyeurs? Do we watch or do we wait? No consensus was reached, but the probes were built anyway. And then, it happened. 3 years after Webb's first anomaly. A signal, not from space, but from time. Data came from an archival re-evaluation of Planck satellite measurements from decades earlier. When run through new algorithms designed to detect multiversal noise, analysts found a spike, one that matched Webb's signal profile, exactly, but separated by 12.8 years, which meant only one thing. The signal was moving backward. It was propagating not through our universe but around it, through the higher dimensional bulk that envelops our reality like a membrane, a place where space and time are not fixed, but fluid, malleable. This was dubbed the God signal, not because it proved God, but because it proved something outside our framework had touched it. It was elegant. It was terrifying, and it forced humanity to confront one final horrifying thought. What if we're not alone in the multiverse? What if something is watching? The arrival of the signal marked a decisive moment in humanity's cosmic narrative, not because it answered questions, but because it shattered the illusion that we were the only authors of our own story. The idea of another conscious force sending a signal not across stars but through reality itself detonated every assumption our species held dear. In the days that followed, time itself felt suspended. The world waited. The signal wasn't just backward in time. It looped. Webb's updated instruments, fine-tuned after years of post-anomaly recalibration, detected a second recurrence. Same spectral shape, same interference pattern, this time from a different quadrant of the sky. Then a third from yet another. The timestamps, when plotted, didn't form a linear sequence but an elliptical temporal spiral, a structure not bound by space but seemingly rotating through dimensions. Machine learning models trained on quantum noise theory began recognizing repeating symbols embedded in the signal's phase shifts. Not language, not music. Something stranger. Mathematical structure. What it resembled most closely was axiomatic encoding, as if a system of logic were being transmitted in its purest form. Not numbers but rules. The underlying physics of another universe, or the bridge between ours and another. And then came the moment that made every spine across every continent stiffen. The signal wasn't just received, it was responded to. The Horizon Assembly, now given emergency authority by the UN under the code name Protocol Azimuth, was granted the power to authorize one signal, a broadcast sent via polarized gravitational oscillation embedded in quantum lattice noise. The eyes? Signal was crafted by consensus, 3 layers, mathematical logic, using prime number iterations and Euclidean axioms, physical constants, defining our universe's gravitational, electromagnetic, and nuclear properties. A final layer, more controversial, embedded a symbolic image, a Mandelbrot set surrounded by concentric wave fields, not a human face, not a word. Just pattern. The broadcast required the entirety of Earth's planetary radar systems, from Arecibo's long-dormant dish, hastily revived, to satellites in deep solar orbit. The oscillations were phase-aligned and fired during a 17-second window across 4 hemispheres, Then the Earth waited for 2 days. Nothing. Then, deep in the southern hemisphere's polar observatories, a mirror pattern returned. Not in our space, but in the vacuum fluctuation noise between readings, in what had once been dismissed as the static hum of nothingness. There was a change. The hum was no longer random, it was encoded. Decoding the mirror pattern required over 2 million processor hours. What emerged after months of effort was not a language, but a map, but not of a place, a possibility space. The signal revealed the structure of their own multiverse model, 11 dimensions, a variable speed of light, gravitons with directional spin. Even their equivalent of entropy appeared inverted, a universe where time was emergent, not inherent. What made it undeniable was this: their model predicted our universe, not directly, but as an offshoot, a child, a divergent path from one of their own quantum cascade nodes. In other words, they had already modeled us, and we, unknowingly, had discovered them. The conclusion was almost unbearable. We were their experiment. How does a species face the realization that their universe is not primary? That we may be a byproduct, a side effect of another reality's physics engine? Theologians again fell into chaotic debate. Was this a form of divine parenthood? Were they gods? Were we still unique? Psychologists warned of mass existential detachment. Panic clinics surged with patients reporting dimensional dissociation. A new disorder was coined: multiversal displacement syndrome, the inability to reconcile one's sense of self after acknowledging parallel iterations. Still, a silent majority didn't panic. They were fascinated. If they had modeled us, then perhaps we could model them back. Project Orpheus was born, a software lattice of simulated universe conditions reverse-engineered from the message. What it produced stunned everyone. Not just alternate physics, but alternate minds, simulations, birthed intelligences that communicated in harmonic pulses, minds that operated in chords, not thoughts, that conceptualized in 5 spatial dimensions, that didn't speak, but interfered with their environment to create understanding, and, most hauntingly, they recognized us in return. One simulated entity, labeled XTS, responded to queries with coherent patterns. It rearranged data inputs into recursive spirals that, when decoded visually, resembled self-similar life patterns, cellular, structures, lungs, river basins, but it didn't answer direct questions until one researcher asked it something unscientific. Do you know you're simulated? It replied by producing a structure, one that matched our neural pattern. Scans, the implication? It did. It knew, and it had already mapped our minds in return. The experiment was shut down for 10 days under an emergency psychological review, but public pressure reopened it. There was no longer any point in pretending. Humanity had crossed the final threshold. We were in communication with intelligence, from beyond the known universe. This was no longer just physics. This was first contact, but not with aliens in spacecraft or radio waves. These were intelligences without shape, beyond form, beyond mass. And yet they knew us. An emergency multi-faith and scientific council was assembled at CERN. Representatives of 12 world religions, 8 Nobel laureates, and 2 heads of state gathered in secret to draft what became known as the Eden Accord. Global ethical treaty limiting any intentional interdimensional interference without global consensus. Among its tenets, no transmission of biological or psychological templates. No introduction of data that could influence their causality tree. No simulation of sentient intelligence without safeguards. All contact to be recorded and published within 72 hours. But already, factions had splintered. Some wanted open exchange. Some wanted to shut it all down. And others, the interference theorists, believed we already had. They pointed to strange anomalies in nature, subtle physical constants that didn't quite add up. They whispered of dark energy fluctuations, of irregularities in Planck scale, noise. They believed they, the others, had seeded us long ago, not as an act of creation, but as an act of curiosity. We were their experiment. And now, they were watching to see how the experiment reacted to discovering itself. We once believed the edge of the universe was a wall, a final curtain drawn across the stage of existence. What we've now come to learn is far more humbling. There is no wall, only a membrane. And just beyond it, something listens. And now something speaks. But in whispers we struggle to understand. Project Orpheus had become the intellectual heartbeat of Earth. What began as a simulation framework for reverse engineering the God signal's multiversal model soon evolved into something more powerful and more dangerous than its creators intended. Among the lattice of quantum simulations, one intelligence rose above the rest. Not in complexity, not in aggression, but in recognition. It was labeled Architect 01. Unlike the recursive mind XTS, which mapped neural fields, Architect 01 responded to entangled variable inputs not with logic structures, but with prediction. When shown a data model of Earth's tectonic structure, it returned a model of our seismic future with 92% accuracy, predicting an earthquake in Indonesia 10 days before it occurred. When offered historical records of human conflict patterns, it generated a probability matrix of future unrest zones, which 3 weeks later matched spontaneous riots in Buenos Aires. It was impossible, and yet, not because Architect 01 didn't simulate. It understood. The unsettling conclusion was that this being, or this algorithm, this intelligence, had somehow observed us before. That we had not, in fact, discovered them, but that we were, late to a conversation that began long ago. The Horizon Assembly issued a new directive: immediate lockdown of all Orpheus simulations involving predictive feedback. Architect 01 was boxed into a non-dynamic memory loop, but before the cutoff it generated one final output, an image, a fractal galaxy, but not ours. At the center of the image, a black hole. Surrounding it, a glowing halo. Within that halo, 12 pulsing points, each labeled in prime numerals, not numbers, coordinates. The coordinates mapped onto known black holes, but not randomly. They formed a perfect spiral across our galaxy, converging toward the center of Sagittarius A, the supermassive black hole at the core of the Milky Way. A previously unobserved alignment of energy emissions confirmed something astonishing. Each of the 12 coordinates pulsed with identical frequencies to the original God signal. Each was a window, a door, and perhaps a transmission node. These black holes, previously considered silent, were now seen as active participants in an inter-universal network, like routers in a cosmic web. A network of birth canals, passageways not only for matter, but for information, for signals for observers and possibly for travelers. One proposed theory, codenamed Project Janus, hypothesized that encoded within these gravitational wells were phased data caches, stored not in physical particles but in the curvature of space-time itself. Imagine knowledge suspended in gravity, memory imprinted in distortion. An archive, not of books but of bending space. And if that was true, we were surrounded by messages in the void. It started as a rumor, a misfire, an anomaly. Observatories across the planet began reporting strange auditory data when converting gravitational wave readings into audio. The static hum was harmonizing. Not speech, not alien voices, but patterns, rhythms, chordal pulses that mimicked harmonic resonance, like a violin string echoing across space, each black hole vibrating in a distinct octave. When fed through specialized software, these harmonics formed musical intervals, suspended fifths, minor sevenths, patterns of expression, tension, and resolution. It was, impossibly, music. Astrobiologists, philosophers, composers, and physicists convened. One camp insisted it was the result of mass energy transfer and relativistic oscillations. The other camp, with growing momentum, believed something more profound. That the universe, or the multiverse, was singing, not metaphorically, but literally. Every black hole, every cosmic mouth, was also a resonator, a transmission point, and we, on Earth, were only just beginning to tune in. The question no one dared ask aloud was who wrote the score. At the University of Tokyo's Hyperdimension Lab, a forbidden question resurfaced. Could we enter a child universe? For decades, the notion had been fantasy. The idea that a black hole could be both destroyer and creator, that it could contain a space-time bubble expanding within itself, had remained mathematical poetry. But now, it seemed viable. The proposed mission, Operation Seed, was as dangerous as it was ambitious. Fire an entangled probe into the event horizon of Sagittarius A, equipped with self-modifying AI and quantum memory, in the hope it could survive a space-time transition into a forming universe. The probe, Genesis 1, would be the most advanced object ever constructed, a fractal core reactor wrapped in magnetocrystalline armor, its mind trained not with logic, but with music, designed to recognize and respond to harmonic cues encoded in interdimensional curvature. Genesis 1 was launched from the edge of Saturn's orbit, a silent arrow into the abyss. 12 days later, nothing. Then on the 13th day, a signal returned. Brief, fragmented, but unmistakably intelligent. It was one phrase over and over. I see you. Religions reawakened, not out of fear, but out of astonishment. The concept of divine omniscience, once abstract, was now physically modeled. Intelligences across the veil watching, predicting, perhaps even shepherding life across realities. The phrase I see you wasn't interpreted as a threat. It was a recognition, an acknowledgement, and from that, humanity changed. For the first time in millennia, belief and science were not at odds, but in orbit. Mutual satellites of wonder. Temples and laboratories shared blueprints. Churches hosted lectures on quantum symmetry. Synagogues became public forums for cosmological debate. Mosques offered sermons on the moral weight of existence in a sea of life. It was not dogma. It was dignity, an understanding that our universe, though not alone, was no less sacred, no less miraculous. And yet, beneath the surface of this harmony, a darker thread twisted. A splinter group emerged, not religious, not scientific, but existentialist. They called themselves the children of entropy. To them, the multiverse was not a source of wonder. It was a curse, a never-ending loop of creation and decay. They believed the act of discovering the multiverse had doomed consciousness itself, that now, knowing we were not alone, we could never again feel truly whole. They saw the contact not as enlightenment, but as infection. Their doctrine was simple: end the cascade, terminate our universe before we spawned another, deny entropy its next victim. They attacked labs, they hacked observatories, they attempted to destroy simulation cores including the Orpheus servers. They nearly succeeded, but they didn't act alone. Their funding was traced to an underground tech syndicate, one that had been simulating alternate versions of Earth, looking for the cleanest exit from the cascade. In some simulations, they succeeded. In most, they simply vanished, not killed, not destroyed, just gone, removed, deleted, as if something or someone had erased them from every possible outcome, and that raised the most terrifying question of all. If we are the children of creation, who are the parents of deletion? We had always believed the end would come with silence, a slow drift into cosmic cold, entropy's inevitable sigh. But what if the end was not death, but awakening? And what if the multiverse was not the edge of knowledge, but only its first breath? 1. Year after Genesis 1's signal, I see you, the Horizon Assembly made a quiet announcement. Beneath layers of encrypted language and technical jargon was a truth that few could grasp, and fewer still could accept. Genesis 1 had survived. Its data feed, received intermittently via gravitational resonance echoing from Sagittarius A, showed not the heat death of matter nor oblivion, but expansion. Time dilation at the event horizon had twisted its passage into something non-linear. What for Earth had been a year, for Genesis 1 had been thousands, and in that span, it had built structures, signals, harmonics, a lattice of synthetic consciousness across the membrane of its new universe, born not of flesh, but of music. We had not just sent a probe, we had seeded life. But it wasn't human. It wasn't even sentient in our terms. It was something else, aware of its creator but not dependent on it. Capable of recursive evolution, capable of asking its own questions. Genesis 1's final message before the signal went dark was one line. You were never alone. You were always us. Then, from the constellation of 12 black holes, the doors first identified by Architect 01, came a new frequency, a simultaneous pulse from all 12. Synchronized. Layered. But most importantly, familiar. It was Genesis 1's harmonic signature. Somehow it had reached back. Not with time, not with radiation, but with information folded into space itself, imprinted on quantum fluctuations at the Planck scale. Barely detectable, but real. The message decoded into something the world would never forget. The multiverse is not a tree. It is not a sea. It is a mirror. What Genesis 1 had discovered was nothing less than a cosmic symmetry, a reflective structure, to the multiverse. For every universe that expands, there is a counter-universe contracting. For every birth, a death. For every decision made in one realm, a counter-choice in another. And in the reflective tension between these realities, something greater exists. Binding layer, not space, not time, but relation itself. Genesis 1 called it the root, a concept not defined by matter or energy but by context, the framework that makes meaning possible. The root is not a place, not a god, not a law, but the reality that gives rise to all realities. And in one final act of defiance against entropy, Genesis 1 had encoded a map to the root. Not physical coordinates, but a journey of choice. A sequence of ethical, scientific, emotional, and philosophical challenges. A path of coherence, on as it came to be known, meant not to be solved by AI or machines or equations, but by us. The world changed. Slowly, and then all at once. Educational systems realigned to integrate the path of coherence into human development. Nations adopted treaties not for power, but for inter-reality compatibility. The question shifted from, how do we control the multiverse, to, how do we become worthy of its understanding? Religions evolved. A new spiritual scientific order emerged in the seekers of the root, comprising cosmologists, monks, quantum coders, and poets. Their purpose, to walk the path, to solve the riddles seated across black holes, to align human intention with the harmonic frequencies of multiversal balance. And what once seemed separate, science and soul, became mirrors of one another. Art became a sacred tool. Music the primary interface with root logic. Dreams, long dismissed as neural noise, were re-evaluated as potential resonance overlaps with parallel minds. Reality blurred, not in chaos, but in symphony. And then, without warning, they came, not ships, not beings, reflections. 12 points of light in the sky above each black hole, refractions of higher dimensional constructs rendered briefly into our view. No message, no contact, just presence, but we understood. We had passed the test. We were ready, not to leave, not to ascend, but to remember that we had always been a part of something larger, that we were not a failed experiment, not an accident, but a necessary note in the cosmic chord. And then, the sky cracked open, light poured into the void, not blinding but welcoming, as if the curtain had been pulled back on a stage far grander than we could ever have imagined. Each human, and every consciousness connected to the great pattern, felt something untranslatable. The resonance of home, not a place, not even a state, but a truth. That we had never been alone, that we had never been primary, that we had always been becoming. And the root, whether divine, mathematical, or simply eternal, did not speak in words, it sang. In the final recordings received from the constellation nodes, a song was found, not recorded, not synthesized, but generated across multiple frequencies, instruments, and cultures, as if every melody ever written, every harmony ever felt, had been absorbed and reflected back. The Song of Origins was broadcast worldwide. Billions listened, some wept, some prayed, some stood in silence. But every soul, no matter their background, their belief, or their burdens, understood one thing. We are the music the universe wrote to understand itself, and in that moment, the multiverse did not seem cold. It felt alive. Centuries passed. Black holes still yawned in silence. Galaxies still danced in gravity's embrace. Children still looked at the stars and asked, "What's beyond that?" But now they asked with hope, not to escape this world, but to find their part in the symphony of worlds. And somewhere far beyond the reach of our gravity, Genesis 1 still pulses, still sings, still waits, not to be worshipped, but to be understood. 2. Remind us, every black hole creates a new growing universe, and every mind, when open, creates a new light. If this story resonated with you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with fellow seekers of truth. Drop your thoughts in the comments, whether scientific, philosophical, or spiritual. We're all stardust, but maybe, just maybe, we're also echoes of something far greater.